Hello, everybody. Welcome to XenTegra's IGEL Weekly Podcast. This is episode 59. My name is Patrick Toner, and I am joined by my very refreshed, fresh off of vacation colleague and friend, Sebastian Perusat. Seb, how you doing?
Hi, Patrick. Glad to be back. As I already mentioned in the community, my wife, I really love her, but she is not geeky enough to replace all of you listeners and other community members. So, really happy to be back. I'm feeling good. We have a nice summer temperature outside in Germany. So, in Fahrenheit, I can't say it, but in normal Celsius, we are about 30 degrees. So, it's warm, but not too warm. So, it's just perfect. And yeah, house is still there. Everyone is still alive and healthy. And I'm coming back from a small rock festival on the last weekend. So my ears are a little bit destroyed, but I'm happy. What about you,
Good.
Patrick?
I'm good, but I think what I heard there is on vacation, you tried to talk to your wife about custom partitions and LS USB commands, and she just wasn't having it. Is that what I heard there?
I did that during my sleep, apparently. So
Oh, yeah.
that's what
Very
I've been
good.
told.
Very good. And we're also joined by Andy Whiteside. Andy, how you doing? Oh, never mind. Andy is not joining us.
He was never
Um,
there.
he's never there. Never there. If we're watching on video,
Hey,
you can
Patrick,
see
can you
them.
hear me okay?
I can hear you. How you doing, Andy?
Good. I'm just making some speaker adjustments. That's why I was trying not to get you to talk to me yet, because I can
Oh,
barely
got
hear
it.
you guys. Sounds like you can hear me fine though.
We can hear you
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Very good. So,
I'll be switching over. Here we go.
very good. Very good. And Seb, I think you were, if I'm not mistaken, went to France for vacation.
Yeah, that's right. On the south of France, so to the Atlantic Sea. It's not a big city, but it's a really nice place to stay because if you think about the temperature that we have at the moment in Europe, and I guess it's the same in the US, it's extreme warm some part of the world. And if you get near to the sea, you have a little bit of wind, and it's not that hot. You can jump to the water. So I must say that it was a great time to stay there because now the temperatures are a little bit decreasing here in Europe. So it was just the right moment to stay at the seaside. And I just visit my mother, my family, and we had a great time there. So yes, absolutely right. It was France.
Very good. And you managed to stay safe from shark attacks during Shark Week. That's that's a big thing. So it's very good. That's all the craze right now. Every time I look at the news, it's like shark sightings off of Long Island in Florida. Uh, yeah, I think everybody's heightened sensitivity during Shark Week. I don't know. I don't know what
I
that
must
is.
say that it's not the case in the part of Europe where I'm spending my vacation. I mean, there might be sharks somewhere really outside of the coast, but the water is still pretty cold. So sharks are not really coming near to the coast. I would say not even close to something like a coast. So you have maybe some small sharks in the Middle Sea, which is a smaller sea with less waves but warmer water. But that's a way far away from where I'm spending my vacation. So I must say in Europe, I guess we have not the same situation like you have in the US or maybe in Australia and New Zealand. It's extremely rare to see a, let's say, living shark
That's
outside of
good.
SeaWorld.
That's good. It was similar when I was at the New Jersey beaches. I mean, the water's always freezing, and I always felt like if anyone's going to get attacked, I have a higher likelihood. Very pale belly. I figure the shark might think I'm a seal, but thankfully nothing has ever happened. The water here in Florida is way warmer. I mean, you go in
Yeah.
there, it's like 80 degrees. Anyway, we
So
digress.
Patrick, we went down to that part of Florida probably like 8 years ago for spring break. Spring break and sometime in the fall. That's when you'll see the pictures of the sharks going south, and you'll see they'll be on the coast of Florida at that point.
That's when I will not be in the water for sure. That's too much Jaws and Shark Week as a kid just destroyed my had developed an irrational fear of sharks in the ocean. So I probably have a higher likelihood of dying of a bee sting.
If it makes you feel better, I think seals are dark fur, and so you should stick out, and they might not want you.
You know what? You just gave me some more confidence. I'm going in the water tonight. That's it. I'm going at dusk.
That's one of the problems with like the dark swimsuits. They think you're a seal.
Ah, man, I never heard that. That's note to self: no more dark swimsuits. And well, all right. Now that we've completely gone off track, I think so well, Andy, how you doing? You joined a little late. You had the audio issues. Everything good?
No, I didn't. I just had to change my. I went mountain biking this morning with an old friend of mine, and we had breakfast afterwards. And I'm getting a late start to the day, and then I got on a couple business calls, and well, I was late. It's trying to live life and work.
There you go. Tough balance. All right. Well, so we have a great topic. Andy, you want me to go ahead and share it out on my side? We've got.
Yeah, you guys go ahead and go. I'll just play along and listen, and appreciate you guys getting this together without me.
All right, very cool. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to share out here. We've got a great topic for today. It's a topic, Seb and I were just chatting beforehand. Sometimes, we assume, we've been around IGEL a long time. We assume that every IGEL customer, or even people that are active in the community or whatever, are just very familiar with all of the main features. I was telling Seb, Chris Feeney, Ron Nair, and I just did a IGEL monthly workshop with IGEL. And we did custom partition, and there was a member of the community, David Prowse, shout out to David if you're listening, who you would assume, he's one of the most active members in the community, and he was kind of like on the call, like, hey, I don't really use custom partition. So it was a learning experience for him. So, and I think today's topic is similar. It's one that maybe is more used than custom partition, but it's a great feature, and you don't want to assume people know everything about it.
Well, especially if you're younger. So yesterday we were on a call with a guy doing a Nutanix sizing exercise, and when it was time to transfer the file back to us, there must have been 8 easy ways he could have got the file to us. OneDrive, share file, transfer it through the team session. And the topic came up about, back in the day, and even still today, the customer has one example of this. Somebody had to put up an FTP site or a TFTP site to get this done, or FTP site. And we were joking about how, we kind of missed those days because it's set apart the people who knew what they were doing from the people who just thought copy and paste or drag and drop was actually doing something.
Yeah, it's just a great point. Because that generation really didn't have to deal with some of that stuff. You think of like things like Norton Ghost and, the days of imaging devices with fog and all these different things. Some of the younger counterparts, they've never even heard of that stuff. But yeah,
sometimes those things are still applicable, but people don't know what they don't know, so therefore they don't have those tools in their toolbox.
Sure, absolutely, and I think specifically around this topic, this is something that some customers may use it, not realize they're using it, but it's what we're talking about today is file transfer. Right. The UMS has a great built-in ability to handle file transfers. And when you start to unpack it, it really does you realize there's a lot here. There's a lot of really cool caveats around this feature. So, Seb, I'm just going to turn it over to you to kind of give an introduction about kind of, how does, what is a file transfer in IGEL terminology? How's it handled? Just kind of give an introduction, and if you want, I could start playing the video and we just talk through it. Does that work? Very good.
That would be absolutely perfect. So yeah, basically that's already what you mentioned. We have an IGEL operating system, which is usually deployed on the endpoint or on a virtual machine or UD Pocket, and we have a universal management suite server, with the server component, which is used for the managing components of the endpoint. So we are usually deploying profile. That's what we call settings to an endpoint, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty easy and straightforward and already covered in other podcasts. But now we have customers who are asking during a POV, so proof of value, or in the Agile community, hey, I need a specific certificate for my certificate authority configuration on the Citrix Workspace app or in my web browser, or maybe for other applications deployed via custom partitions. Or just a really simple and easy use case, deploying a wallpaper. In the former days, it was even more complicated. Now it's pretty straightforward. But everything that you want to deploy to the endpoint needs to be deployed as a file. And now you could say, yeah, basically you could also use a USB stick or maybe just download it via a web browser. Basically, yes, it's right. But as you may know, we are having, I would call it a quite secure operating system, which is not persistent over a reboot. And most of the component of the IGEL operating system, if something is changed, manipulated, or downloaded in that area, if it's still possible, would be resetted after a reboot. So that's where the magic happens from the file transfer perspective on the UMS side. So we are using that basically for everything that we want to transfer to the endpoint, and we are using a specific channel for that. So I'm just mentioning it because it's part of one of the most common questions. If we speak about the IGEL Cloud Gateway or UMS, we're transferring a file from the UMS to the endpoint via the port TCP 8443, which is configured by default. You don't have to change something which is installed by the UMS component itself.
And hey, Seb, that's great to call that port out, because that's, as soon as you start to see, especially when you're just trying to get IGEL stood up or whatever, hey, the license isn't transferring. Hey, my wallpaper is not transferring. Right away, that's like, okay, that's a port you need to check, make sure that's open. 8443, very, very key port.
Definitely. Thanks for jumping in, because that's basically if not configured differently, the standard way we're deploying, like you mentioned already, also the licenses to the endpoint. So it's not a specific stream that we are opening or something like that. It's really just a file transfer we're using by using that channel. So now, let's come back to the how to deploy all that settings. We have a component in the IGEL UMS which is called firmware customization. Honestly, I guess it's one of the less user-friendly pronunciations, a terminology for the use case we are trying to deliver with that. Why? If you want to deploy a wallpaper, you're using a firmware customization. It's not something which is extremely clear, so I just want to mention wallpaper is equal to firmware customization. It's nothing to do with custom partition. That nothing to do with some weird Linux script that you're doing in your matrix kind of world. No, it's just deploying pre-configured use cases to the endpoint. And that's where the firmware customization is coming in. So there you have different use cases, starting off as a boot splash, the wallpaper, own icons you would like to use for the start menu, etc. We already covered that in another tutorial, but just saying that's a firmware customization approach. Then I got the next step in my video was the firmware updates. That's the second step where we're deploying files. We have the universal firmware update. It's usually at the bottom of your UMS console, and you are assigning that components to an endpoint as a profile, because basically it's nothing other than a profile. And the endpoint, as soon as it's targeted by that profile and a comment, will start the update. But that's really the way how we are deploying it in a, let's say, standardized way. So now I'm trying to explain, I guess it was the next step, the standard file, because the standard file is a certificate that you want to deploy. So you have a specific function in the IGEL UMS, which is called files, where you can right-click that component and say new file. Yes, right. Patrick, so just a bit earlier, it's the section, right, exactly, at 2, something like that, right. So that's a file that I want to deploy to an endpoint. In my case, I want to deploy a specific bash file. It doesn't make sense every time to deploy it this way, but that's a standard use case with it having to create a profile for it. So you have to keep in mind that the file is on your local file system, not on the UMS server, and we need it there. So that's the reason why you're creating a new file by opening the context menu, then going to the file system, to the file you want to use, and you are uploading that in that step to the UMS server, to the web dev component we're using there.
So Seb, just as a quick recap on what all of that, right? Because there's so many things you would use this for, right? So some of the main ones, like certificates. If you want to, I have a lot of customers, hey, especially if they're not in Citrix Cloud, if they have an on-prem Citrix environment or on-prem VDI environment, they may need to push a certificate to their devices in order for their device to be able to connect to VMware or Citrix or whatever their broker is. That would be one example, a certificate. You mentioned wallpapers, another really popular one. So whether they're doing it the old way through a profile or they're using what you were talking about, firmware customization, the underlying thing is still the same, right? It's still, there's still a mechanism to push that file down to the devices. But so you have, again, wallpapers, screensavers. You mentioned changing the look and feel of the OS, the start button, the different icons and things like that. All of these things, if they're not natively baked into the sandboxed read-only OS, they can be pushed down to a writable partition in the operating system using this feature. Do I have that right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, just because you're mentioning it, I mentioned it quite briefly at the beginning. You could also, in the format time, create a profile to download a wallpaper to the endpoint by using a specific user interface setting. Just for the people out there who are still thinking that the way to use it, you can still use it, but I would recommend to use the firmware customization instead, because it makes it a little bit more clearer. It makes also the configuration and what you're doing, what kind of files you're deploying, a little bit more, in my opinion, more structuralized. But yes, exactly. So
you're saying that's your preference? Is that what you're going with that, Sebastian?
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
You know, it's funny you say that. I've worked with a few customers that are like really legacy customers, like OGs of IGEL, right? And they prefer to do it that way. Now, I came in after the firmware customization existed, and that's my preference. But very that's interesting. Anyway, so those are some of the use cases, right? And there's different ways to do this, but under the hood, right? Ultimately, I believe it's Apache Derby. Is that right? Or Apache Tomcat?
Yes. No, Apache Tomcat in the background, and the Apache Derby is the database we're using, right?
Okay.
If you use the embedded database.
So it's Apache Tomcat pushing these files from the UMS to the devices to a writable partition over port 8443. So just at a real, basic technical level, that's what's happening here.
Exactly. So that's the step we are delivering when you go back to the new file section in the video. That's what we are doing by transferring and choosing our file from the local file system. The UMS server will take that file from your endpoint, from your file system, and upload it in a specific web dev component. So that's basically the web service we're delivering to the endpoint, which is available from their point of view, and where basically all the files of your communication are stored. It goes over the universal firmware update. It goes over the certificate authorities you want to deploy, over custom partitions. There are alternatives to that. You can use your own web server, but let's say in a standard way, that's where all the files are located. And that's, if you look at the wizard we are looking at in the video, so where you have the new target, you have a classification and a device file location. Here, just to be clear, we're not speaking about your endpoint. We're not speaking about your file system, neither the file system of the UMS server. No, not at all. We are predefining in that specific section where, as soon as this file is assigned to an endpoint, to a profile, or to a directory, where it should be located on the IGEL OS endpoint. That's the reason why you see a /WFS, which is one specific part of the file system, which is writable and also accessible by specific users, let's call it this way. And that's where we are putting also our files, our certificate, but internal information also, to get them kept after a reboot. And then in the same window, we have the access rights, which are usually not, let's say, quite often used, because we usually just need a read write for the user we are targeting. But just to be clear, we have an owner, we have others, and we have the root user. So you have to choose, depending from the use case you're looking at for your bash file, which context you want to use there. And then, as soon as you clicked OK, the file is transferred, is registered in the UMS as an element, so also in the database, and you can deploy it to an endpoint. And that's, as soon as you assign it, what we are checking on the next section of the video, the check file location locally. So I'm now switching to the endpoint, the IGEL OS endpoint, and I'm opening a local terminal, which is not available by default. So the profile that I signed in prior, logging as a root user, so with a main administrator user, navigating to /WFS with the command change directory, which is CD abbreviation. And then I'm putting it in LL to list all the files. And you see now in the video that we have bash.sh, that's the file I uploaded, are available on the endpoint, available in my /WFS folder. So that's a pretty easy and standard approach to deploy a bash script. But
for any of the listeners listening, those commands are what you were saying in your sleep on vacation. Those are the ones your wife was getting a little
yeah, exactly.
little concerned about.
Exactly that one. I mean, fun fact: I had in fact some Linux discussions with her, and I had really one dream, but I can't tell it with a podcast. We have to do that offline.
I've never breached the topic of Linux with my wife yet. I just
You should. You should.
Yeah. I'm gonna go. You know what?
Save.
I'll give you an update on the next podcast. I'll let you know how it goes.
Please. So that's basically just checking on the local file system that the file is arrived. There are also all the way around inside of the UMS to check the files transfer. I will mention it in a second, but we're really looking from the endpoint side. So now I'm coming to the next section where we're speaking about the certificate authority, and there I would recommend maybe to make just a short break, a short pause, because I'm showing on the screen right now, on your screen, Patrick, an extremely important information. If you want to deploy certificate authority, a certificate to the IGEL operating system, please be aware that you have to use a base 64 format, which isn't the standard format on a Microsoft world, at least not if it's not configured differently. So you have to check before even starting any kind of process of deploying the file, to check if the file is starting with begin certificate and with an end certificate. If something else is shown, like some hieroglyphs, some weird characters, something which is not readable, to be more clear, please recheck the format of the certificate, because you could deploy it 1,000 times. The operating system, the Citrix Workspace app client or whatever, will not be able to read it. So just to be clear, edit it with a Notepad, Notepad++, with VI, Morecat, whatever tool you're using, and check begin certificate, end certificate. If you have that, I would say you have 90% of the job done already.
That is a great little tip there. I mean, that, this is not exactly the most exciting topic when you're talking about certificates, but it's probably one of the, like in certificates in general, not just in IGEL terminology, is probably one of the least understood things out there with IT people. And I think, even take that a step further, Seb, that base 64 is key. The other thing I've noticed with Linux and, IGEL and my time around it is you generally want your files, if possible, in a .pem format, a PEM, which is the most Linux friendly. It doesn't always have to be. You can get away with CER or CRT, but it has to be in that base 64, or you'll be sitting there spinning wheels saying, why is the certificate not working? I'm following the steps exactly like these instructions tell me, and it's not working. Well, that's generally the first culprit right there.
To 100%. And I cannot tell how often I ask that question. Is it really base 64? Yes, it is. We did all the debugging steps. We went through the OpenSSL route, and we're checking it's not base 64. So really, it's not a recommendation that we're putting in the air and saying, hey, just check that and forget it. It's really mandatory, because you will waste a lot of time if not checking that. I mean, you should also check if the certificate authority is the only one you need, if you need the chain, and all the other stuff. But before doing that, you need the right format. So that's really something I cannot mentioning it enough. I already mentioned it in other podcasts. Check that, and then I guess you will have a happy life after that. It's the certificate authority.
Open the certificate in Notepad if you're in Windows, or Notepad++, or run this command, the more, and the certificates, and that's going to give you your data, right? That's a great tip. I mean, something that, is going to be useful to anybody who's listening to this, who's struggling with certificates. This is the first place to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're using web browser, web browser to access your storefront on NetScaler, it isn't really mandatory. If you want to bypass the certificate error and saying the site you're trying to reach is not secured and all that stuff, for testing, it's all good. But as soon as you want to go to production, believe me, you need that, just because also of security perspective, but also just because the Citrix Workspace client can also have a strange behavior if you're using a NetScaler and you have not the right certificate authority deployed. I mean, I'm not a NetScaler guru at all, but I just know they had a lot of interesting behaviors in the last 8 years. So just showing that, it's extremely important. So coming back to the certificate uploading in the UMS. I can just mention it again. You go to files, you create a new file, and you have the same wizard, right? So you don't have to think about something else. It's the same wizard. You have a new file, you have your classification, you have your device file location. Just in case, but I guess it was something around minute 7.
Okay.
Just to keep it on track. So we have the local file, so that's certificate authority we want to upload to the UMS server to deploy them afterwards to the endpoint. Pretty easy. You choose your certificate, all good. Then you have a small ribbon, which is called classification, which is predefined by undefined. That's great for a file, like a wallpaper. If you want to deploy it this way, it can be great for a file you want to deploy, all good. For certificate authority, no, please don't use that. For testing, before going too deep in any kind of more secured way, please use the common certificate all-purpose. You could say, hey, why should I do that? I know it's a web browser certificate I want to use. No question. You're sure about that, and I will never say that you're not right. But believe me, if you don't use the right one, you might have an issue because it will deploy to the wrong certificate authority store. So it's really mandatory, not mandatory, my recommendation to use the classification common purpose, because it will be deployed to any kind of local certificate authority stores. It can be /WFS/CA/certs. It can be the Firefox. It can be other web browsers and so on. Please use that one because it will do all the magic for you. You don't have to think about something else.
Hey, can I make a comment on that, Seb? Because that's one
Please.
that in the past I've seen this as an issue, right? So, at a real basic level, what we did originally, the /WFS, that's the writable file system. You can put anything there. You can put, if you wanted to put a custom, audio file or whatever there, it'll live through a reboot. That writable file system, when you reboot this, the files stay there. So if you're going to do undefined, that's where you want to put your file. But when you get into things like SSL certificates, like you're talking about, which is probably the most common thing we deal with, right? It's like, hey, an SSL certificate to authenticate against something like Citrix or VMware or whatever. But I've never had any trouble when I use common certificate. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Seb, but the reason for that is common certificate will place that certificate in multiple directories where certificates are invoked. So by checking common certificate, you're basically just protecting yourself. No matter what type of certificate it is, it's going to be where it needs to be. It might be in more places than it needs to be, but it's going to be where it needs to be. Is that accurate?
That's more than accurate. It's just perfect, right? It's just putting it into different file location, but also registering the file in different certificate authority stores. If you think about the Mozilla Firefox, like an example, you don't have a file, let's say a file directory, we can put in file in it and it will be registered automatically. You have to do that by using command line commands, and you can do that by your own, obviously. But that's what we are doing for you. So you can use as a search util command. You have different Linux command also to register that in the to the Firefox certificate authority database. But that's something which is done automatically by using the file's common certificate or the different classification that you may need. In that case, it makes it even easier for you to do that.
Very good.
Right. So I'm just then checking again on the local file system after assigning the file to the endpoint and waiting that the file is deployed. Again, in the local terminal, if the file arrived, and if so, if it's in the right directory.
Which is so key. That's so key, Seb, right? As you're moving these files, to just have a terminal open. A lot of times people, I put the file there. Well, let's check if it's there. Throw the terminal open, do a CD to the directory, and then just type ls and see what certs are living there. Kind of troubleshooting 101,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's from the endpoint if you're an administrator. But I just mentioning at the beginning of the podcast, we have in the meantime also a cool part of the UMS console, which is telling even more. So just mentioning for the audience, I don't think I'm mentioning in the video blog. If you go to your endpoint in the IGEL UMS console, you have, if you click on the device with the left click, you see all the asset information of your endpoint. So you see the last IP address, you see which displays are connected to the endpoint, etc. But you have also a file status part of the window. And that small part of the window will tell you which files went deployed to the endpoint and if the transfer was okay or not. So just say you don't have to go to the terminal every time, like someone which is living in the Linux world. No, obviously you can use the UMS console to check that in prior. And then if you want to get double cross check, you can also go to the endpoint. So that's what I just wanted to mention, because I don't want to, let's say, have people fearing to use the Linux command to check something. It just in the UMS console predefined.
And is that in the video here, Seb? Because
no, that's what I mentioned. I don't think so.
Okay.
So I just wanted to mention it for the people who are listening, that you can use the UMS console also to do that. But I will edit the video afterwards and put that into it.
That is a great, we're kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like I've been around IGEL a long time, and I've never used that in UMS. I always have gone to the terminal to check, and maybe that's just a little bit of the paranoia of the admin in me. But but yeah, that's great to know that feature's there, which I just never have used it.
Yeah, it definitely helps a lot. I will start my second UMS server, and I will try to show it at the end of the webinar, of the Zoom session together with you guys, that you have a picture of what I'm telling. So I'm starting the UMS right now, but we can just move forward on the video, and I will do that at the end.
Cool.
So
in the video here, it looks like you're trying to get into your UMS server, into the Apache Tomcat portion of it, and take a look at the files. Is that what we're looking at here?
Exactly right. So we mentioned it already. We have an Apache Tomcat on the UMS server side. We have a web dev component, a web dev share to be more precise, which is called UMS_file transfer. And that's where all your files are located. That's where your endpoint would download the files from. So you check that the files is assigned to the endpoint, but the file never reached the device. So first thing I would check in your case is to start a local web browser. That's usually a Firefox or Chromium on your IGEL OS. Then open it just with a standard URL and enter the URL path https // then the IP address or host name of your UMS server. Then /8443, mentioning the port we're using. Again, / and then UMS_file transfer. Hit enter, and you should, and that's something that is a first check to do, see a certificate error message. Because it's an untrusted certificate authority that we're using, because it's an unsigned one from IGEL. That's fine in that case. If you don't get that, please do all the other network check, like ping to check if the UMS server is reachable from the endpoint. I would expect yes, but please check that. And if not, we have a command which is called probe port, which is really, not sure if the English pronunciation is right, but it's PROBEPORT. Then blank IP address of your UMS server, blank 8443. And this tool will check if the port 8443 is reachable from the endpoint to the UMS server.
One of the greatest features built into the operating system, in my opinion. I mean, whenever you have a port issue, telnet from the server, probe port from the IGEL endpoint, and you will figure out every port, whether they're open or not, back and forth. Yeah. Just super useful.
Couldn't agree more on that. So usually you don't have to use that because we have checked everything already, but just saying if it's not opening, that's something that you should do. So now on the video, it was, I guess, something like a minute ago, Patrick, just after the certificate error that we got after connecting. We have the ability to overwrite the potential security risk ahead warning from your browser and saying open it. Yeah. And opening it already. If you are asked, and you will, by a password and a username, please don't use the local IGEL OS ones. Please use the UMS user and the UMS path that you're using there, because that's basically what the IGEL operating system will try to do when downloading the certificate authority file.
Well, and Seb,
then,
I think just real quick on that point, I think I saw what you did in there was you and this is what I do, and I always recommend people do this: create a user, an administrator user that only has the ability to do web dev. So I think that's what you're doing right here. You're opening up, you're going in, you can create a custom user. So this would be like a database user in IGEL that has no access to anything at all except for web dev, and use that user just for, doing things like firmware updates or files or whatever. I think that's a best practice, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I'm creating, depending from the use case, I'm creating different users on every POV. For the main administrator, then we have groups or users for specific, let's say, service desk users. But the UMS downloading user is also extremely important, because you can then use it specifically for your custom partitions and all the other stuff that you want to deploy, which is maybe less secure, but secure enough to not give that user a complete access to the UMS component. Absolutely right. No, that's definitely best practice.
And then specifically what you're doing here, right? When you hit the UMS server, the UMS file transfer directory of your UMS server, you're going to get hit with that username and password. You can use that username and password. If it's something basic, a user called download or whatever, IGEL or whatever you want to call that user, IGEL download, if you want to get really creative. You can you can use that user and the password you create, and you can see all of your files in the browser. You can, as we're talking about here, open the certificate and look at the properties of it or whatever, download it. So it's a really great troubleshooting tool in your tool belt.
Definitely right. So, the web browser is just one approach. You can also use wget, you can use curl from the command line, but hey, we're still speaking about people who are not using IGEL or Linux on a daily basis. So opening a web browser, you can also do that obviously from your Windows or Mac OS or whatever endpoint. You're not obliged to do that by using the IGEL OS. You can also do that from your Windows device, but saying that it might make more sense to do that from the endpoint, which is not targeting the file, because then you can really check that not a specific virtual LAN segment or firewall is blocking the transfer. So just a recommendation, but not mandatory. But yes, exactly right.
I think if you're going to talk to your wife about Linux, you might want to start with the browser portion of looking at those files before you get into wget and all these other commands. I think that's what you're recommending there.
Yeah, absolutely right. So what you mentioned, Patrick, with the specific user testing for the web dev components, what we are doing by minute 11, something like that, or 10, where I create a specific user just for the web dev component and downloading the file and testing the file transfer. So perfect, we covered that one too. Just wanted to mention one thing, because it's still annoying a lot of people that it's needed and not seeing the use case behind it. If something is not working on your IGEL operating system by a file transfer, by a certificate check or whatever, please always check that you have that you have an NTP server and or the correct file and date on your endpoint. Because if that one is not given, you might have the device in the UMS. It might show up as green or red if available or not, but you cannot transfer files or profiles, because we are checking the communication, if it's secure or not, and if the local time and date is absolutely out of range, you will get nothing. You will not get an error, properly spoken, from the endpoint. So please add that to your checklist if you're checking if a file can be transferred or not, and if your certificate authority is working or not. Check local time and date, mandatory.
That is like
the base 64.
Next to probe port, basically all the things we're talking about today. These are like probably some of the most common issues people have. I think when you get into certificates in general and everything that surrounds them, that's like 90% of the problems that people have, in IGEL. And just because it's just, you're right, it's the nature of it. You have to do those checks. If the local time's out of date, that's going to cause a problem. I've seen the issues with the BIOS time causing that issue. BIOS time completely derailing somebody's testing IGEL. And then when you just go in, you set the BIOS time correctly, and it works. And it's all tied to that certificate.
Absolutely right. I mean,
Well,
that's definitely painful. But yeah.
Well, hey Seb, so we're coming up against time. I know we're talking about the UMS. Is there any? I know you're doing a little bit of custom partition towards the end. But what do you want to do in the remaining minutes here? What makes sense to you?
So right, I just explained in the video how to use the custom partition deployment. So I'm not telling how to create that. Ramneer already did an amazing job there. So now I'm just speaking about the way how to deploy it. So in a standard way. So I'm usually copying specific files to my UMS file transfer. And then I'm just explaining how to deploy them to the endpoint by using the custom partition feature. But that's something that is already mentioned in the other podcast, so I guess we can skip it. And I'm seeing on my hand that I covered the file transfer status already. So if you go to the next section to minute 13, you have the UMS console, and if you go back then to the section about minute 13, a little bit straightforward. Right, the next section.
Over here?
Right here. Yeah, perfect. Next section.
Oh, this is the
perfect.
check we were talking about. Okay.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was implemented, but it was there already. So we have the file transfer status, and that's what I mentioned. So you have a status okay or not okay. So you can check there if something is showing up, if a status message is telling that the file is not found anymore, because also people are exchanging the file on the file system itself without using the file feature, and that can also cause some trouble. So just closing the session today was one additional hint. If you are deploying file through the IGEL operating system, and if you're using the UMS console for that, always use the UMS console for that, and not going to the UMS file transfer on the file system and exchanging files there, because we are registering the files into the database, and if the file is not matching anymore because of the checksum, you will also get an error. So you will have to delete the file, you will have to empty the recycle bin and re-upload it. Don't do that. Just use the file, update the file there inside of the UMS console. It's not part of the video. It's just an own recommendation that I'm telling, I guess, in the video. Always use the update file feature, never on the file system if it's already registered in the database.
Well, I think that there's really, I mean, this was fun, Seb. I really had fun geeking out with you on this, because there's so much when you get into this, again, this little, seemingly, feature that nobody really thinks about too often, because a lot of the things we do are drag and drop. In the IGEL UMS, it's kind of like, hey, there might be customers out there, they just drag and drop files. They don't think about it. Maybe they've never had to troubleshoot it. But once you get into that type of mode where something's not working, these are the types of things that are just crucial to understand how everything is working, and how to troubleshoot to make sure that everything's right. So it may be not the most exciting topic, as we mentioned, but it really is for anyone out there who's ever had a problem with this, I guarantee you will find this information useful. And if you haven't had a problem with it, you eventually will. That's just pretty much the way that goes.
Yeah, I agree.
And absolutely. One thing to note, I think maybe Patrick, you may have said it, but we post these podcasts on our YouTube channel as well with the video, if that would help people, if they want to go back and consume it that way and see the visual references while you guys are talking about things.
Yeah, I think that's going to be crucial for this one too. Hey, for sure, Andy, because I mean, it's hard to just probably hear this and understand what we're talking about without seeing it. I'm more of a visual guy. So absolutely.
So that's a great comment. I'm more of a visual guy. So Patrick, you made a comment, sorry, dog's barking, that you saw Seb hit the site, hit the UMS, or maybe the UMS with a browser. And that was the first time you had ever seen that done. Is that what I heard you say?
No. So what I was saying was hitting the there's actually a setting in the UMS console when you push a certificate down, it's right in that middle pane. There's actually it lists all the files and whether or not they've been transferred, and I didn't even know that was there.
Okay, yeah, and that just highlights. I mean, if you don't know, I mean, I know Seb knows. I mean, he just regurgitates this stuff in his sleep. There's a lot of people that
I
don't
wish I
know.
would.
And, having this as a resource when it's time to, it's like trying to work on something at your house these days. Sure, I can read the instruction manual, but there's always that vagueness between what was in writing versus what I could visually see somebody do. And they may leave out that one little, oh yeah, click over here type thing, but you see them do it. Like, oh, that was my problem the whole time. And that's where I love, these conversations and the videos that come out of them as well. It's it's valuable to me, and I kind of know the stuff.
Yeah, totally agree. It's always
Good
good
to
to pick Seb's brain on these topics because, when he does regurgitate him in his sleep, it's great to get it out to the masses. We need this information out there. So, Seb, definitely appreciate your knowledge and all this stuff and your willingness to share, both in the community and in this podcast.
So I'm going to make a plea here for people in the IGEL community. Anybody from the community who listens to this, want to please post this and other podcasts on the community. It's just super valuable content, I think, and I don't think enough listenership is coming from the IGEL community. I also asked to maybe post it in the Citrix community because I think there's tons of folks over there using IGEL that need this information, but the cross-pollination isn't happening.
Yeah, great. Totally agree. We mentioned David Prowse in the C. I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. I've only read it. Coming out to the custom partition workshop, and it was just great to see him. Ron Nair had posted it in the IGEL community, and we had a few guys join from the IGEL community. So, and it was a really great interactive workshop. By the way, speaking of our YouTube channel, it'll be posted there shortly for anyone who wants to check that out. And we had a lot of fun and, just kind of geeking out on that feature. So I'd encourage anybody listening to check that out.
It's really weird for us as XenTegra, myself, Patrick included. We are a value-added reseller in sales, but we're also doing really VAR value-added reseller stuff that should bring value to the community. And we gotta walk a fine line between selling stuff and educating people. We prefer to educate. Sometimes the wrong people perceive that as selling, which in theory it is, but it's the right way to sell.
Absolutely.
Speaking of sales, guys, Seb, I'm just kidding.
Nah. Don't bring on the sales guys. No, please.
Seb, you're a sales guy. You just don't know it. You're an enabler. That's a sale. That's the right type of sales guy. You're a seller for IGEL, whether you realize it or not.
I'm too honest to be a sales guy, I guess. But
hey, listen, if you have good stuff and you do it through education, you can be honest and a sales guy at the same time. Heck, you can be honest and a marketing guy at the same time. I mean, Doug Brown's a marketing guy, but he's about as honest a guy as you're ever going to meet.
Yeah, true. That's a good example. Yeah, right. I mean, yeah. So,
Seb, you may have just driven out all of our sales guy listening audience here.
Nah, never. I must say, I had extremely great contact to my salespeople. I mean, I was in the preset in former times, not a long time ago. It's about 1.5 years ago. So I'm definitely having a part of the sales organization still in my heart, and I had an extremely powerful sales during the years. And I must say, we are just completing each other. I mean, I wouldn't say that sales is not honest, not at all. But there are some things trying to bring things on stage where we as technical people are saying, no, never say that because it's not true. And then in the second step, by doing feature requests, by putting that request from different customers to our PM, they made it available. So I'm just saying in the first one, say, no, never say it's possible. But I must say that maybe the approach we need sometimes to convince customers, but also to convince us our internal colleagues to bring things a step forward.
But Seb, sometimes some of that stuff they say works, it doesn't work yet, or officially doesn't work, drives us all to get it done faster. And at the end of the day, it only helps.
Exactly.
A little pressure.
And I'll also say that majority of people in business development, client executive, that type of stuff are honest, great people. You just get the one shark out there every once in a while that's causes all of his problems.
Right back to Shark Week. We kind of came full circle here, talking about sharks in the beginning, and I guess we'll end on sharks only in the context of salespeople.
Patrick, don't go in the water at dusk. I don't care how you are or not. It's a bad idea.
Well, dusk here is a lot later. I mean, the sun goes down at, a little later in the day. So I feel a little bit more like it's still in the middle. It feels like it's midday to me. So I probably do need to be careful there.
That's why everybody in Florida works. That's why everybody in Florida works 12 hours a day. Keep that in mind.
There you go. Life tip. Noted.
Not true, but conceptually makes sense.
Got it. All right, guys. Well, I had a lot of fun today. This was great. As Andy mentioned, check out our YouTube channel. Also, keep up with our webinars, workshops, events, podcasts. You find all of them at XenTegra.com. Guys, any closing thoughts here? Any words of wisdom?
If you don't know the IGEL community and to know, please join us on theigelcommunity.com. I'm not mentioning it at the end of every podcast because we are mentioning that name 10 times per video, 10 times per podcast. But just in case, we are not a typical marketing tool. I mean, we're not trying to advertise stuff. We're not trying to make some publicity for our solutions every day. That's really tech people speaking to each other. It's, there's kind of geek people who you would like to meet on a trade fair or to meet on an event with XenTegra people and exchanging tech stuff, right? So we're not speaking about the last tea time or a tea party we had. Now we're really speaking about, right now we have a question regarding a codec issue that we have in the Citrix Workspace app 2005. So just saying, yeah, a lot of discussion out there. If you're not a member, we would like to see you there. And I hope that you had fun today with Patrick and Andy regarding a pretty dry topic. And we try to make it, let's say, as passionate as possible. So that's my closing word. Thank you, Patrick and Andy, for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Seb. And thank you, Andy. And everybody listening, thank you. Even you sales guys, we thank you as well. Don't leave us. Don't ever leave us. Keep coming back. Well, all right, guys. Well, you have a good one. I guess we'll be talking to you in September.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys.